Hi, Merwin, and welcome to Finland, first of all.
Thank you.
So, everybody's talking about the Goldstone report and its aftermath at the moment. What kind of importance do you attach to the Goldstone report? Do you think something was achieved by the discussion that the report initiated?
I think there are several aspects to the Goldstone report. Number one, it's crucial that it's coming from somebody who is Jewish and calls himself a supporter of the state of Israel. And the fact that somebody who is Jewish and says he's devoted his whole adult life to working for Israel, that a person like that is calling for Israel to be hauled before the International Criminal Court, it tells you that it's more and more difficult for Jews who call themselves liberal, which is Goldstone and the overwhelming majority of Jews who call themselves liberal. I think they're finding it more and more difficult to blindly support Israeli policy. And so what you're seeing and what Goldstone is symbolic of is the breakup of Jewish support for Israel, because most Jews are liberal, like Goldstone, and are finding it impossible any longer to reconcile their liberal beliefs with the way Israel carries on. Secondly, the Goldstone report marks the first time that human rights issues are becoming politically consequential. Before Goldstone, there were many human rights reports by Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, which were highly critical of Israel, but they mostly collected dust. Few people read them, and their findings, which were highly critical of Israel, were completely ignored. And also right after the Gaza massacre, there were a large number of human rights reports, Amnesty, Human Rights Watch, and many other organizations, which were ignored. And so what Goldstone did was he now put the human rights dimension of the Israel-Palestine conflict on the political agenda. And at least temporarily, it's displaced the empty peace process as the focus of world opinion. And that brings us to the third significance of the Goldstone report, which is that Israel's usual weapons, the weapons it's developed over several decades, to discredit criticism of him, discredit criticism of Israel, those weapons are no longer effective. Alleging that your critic is an anti-Semite, a self-hating Jew, a Holocaust denier, the whole gamut. Those sorts of means to discredit critics of Israel, they're not going to work anymore. Because Goldstone is plainly not an anti-Semite, he's plainly not a self-hating Jew, he's plainly not a Holocaust denier. In fact, everything quite the contrary. He says he's a Zionist, he says he loves Israel, he says Jews have the right to self-determination, he says Jews have the right to self-determination in Palestine, he says his mother was an activist in the Zionist movement, his daughter went to live in Israel for a period of time. He sits on the board of governors of the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. He has an honorary degree from the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. So it's very difficult to make the usual allegations, anti-Semite, Holocaust denier, self-hating Jew. They just won't stick with him. And now Israel is faced with the very unpleasant prospect of having actually to confront the facts and not being able to divert attention from the facts.
Thank you. So, just to get the context right, you quote some human rights organizations, and that you also quote in your book, Beyond Chutzpah. Between October 1st and the October 23rd, 2000, Physicians for Human Rights Israel reported that 17 Palestinian ambulances were utterly destroyed by the Israeli Defense Forces. During the week from October 23rd alone, Physicians for Human Rights Israel reported that additional 26 ambulances were damaged by gunfire. Bethlehem comments, the Israel Defense Forces' use of ambulances for military purposes is especially disturbing in the light of the repeated claims made by the IDF that Palestinians use ambulances to transport weapons and explosives. From 1967, Amnesty International reports, the Israeli security services have routinely tortured Palestinian political suspects in the occupied territories. Bethlehem, General Security Service interrogators have tortured thousands, if not tens of thousands, of Palestinians. Now, in your book, Beyond Chutzpah, you show how extremely similar and equally damning conclusions the mainstream human rights organizations draw on the human rights violations on the occupied territories. Were you at all surprised about the consensus?
Actually, I was surprised because there are many aspects to human rights work. There are many aspects to human rights work which would lead one to conclude that different people would reach different conclusions. Right. First of all, a lot of international law on human rights is vague. What does it exactly mean to use a human shield? It's not entirely clear what human shielding exactly means. So let's take a typical example. You're in the city of Helsinki. Helsinki comes under attack, and the Finnish army puts on this balcony anti-aircraft defenses, artillery or missiles, right? Well, this is a civilian area. You look out the window, there are civilians walking. By placing that anti-aircraft defense on this balcony, and there are civilians here, are they engaged in human shielding? It's not such an obvious answer. You know, my point being that there are many aspects of international human rights law which are vague, and so they're open to different interpretation. Secondly, a lot of human rights work is dependent on the human eye processing things. So you look out the window and you see a demonstration is forming, and then you see the Israeli army approaching the demonstrators. A human rights worker, say from B'Tselem, they contact him, they say, looks like there's going to be trouble here, can you come down and observe it? He comes down, he observes, and he has to see who started it. Was it the Palestinians who initiated the violence, or was it the Israelis? Then you have to ask, were any of the Palestinians armed? Or were they just throwing stones? And then you have to ask, if they were armed, were they in the midst of the crowd, or were they on the sidelines? And then with the Israelis, did the Israelis fire warning shots? Did the Israelis aim at the feet? Or did the Israelis aim for a deadly shot? Those all are significant facts when you're assessing the human rights situation.